4th of June 2024 meeting of the Randwick Local Planning Panel. And before the meeting starts, I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the land of the Bidjigal and the Gadigal people who occupy the Sydney coast, being the traditional owners. On behalf of Randwick Local Planning Panel, I acknowledge and pay my respects to the elders past and present and the Aboriginal people in attendance today. Now, please note that the original panel chair appointed for this meeting is unable to attend. Therefore, in accordance with Clause 23, Schedule 2 of the Environmental Planning Assessment Act, I have been elected by the panel members to preside at this meeting. My name is Kevin Hoffman. With me are Brendan Randles on my left as an expert member and Graham Turner on my right as the community representatives on the panel. I'll give just a brief summary of the experience so that you understand our expertise. I'm both an architect and a town planner. My experience has been as a chief town planner of a sub-region of New South Wales, and then as a director of a private consultancy in architecture and town planning. Following that, I was Commissioner of the New South Wales Land and Environment Court for 14 years. And since retiring from the court, I have participated as an expert witness person or as a chair of several local planning panels in the Sydney region. Can I ask Brendan Randles just to summarise his?
Yes, thanks, Kevin. I'm an architect and urban designer with about 30 years experience locally and internationally. I'm on numerous design review and local planning panels throughout Sydney and Wollongong. And I've actually taught in urban design at major universities in Sydney and till recently with Emeritus James Werrig of the University of New South Wales.
Thank you. And Graham Turner, would you like to summarise?
Yes, I'm Graham Turner. I've got degrees in environmental science and a working background with state governments, mainly in environmental science and town planning. But first and foremost, I'm a community representative. I've lived in Randwick LGA for over 40 years.
Thank you, Graham. Now, all panel members were required to sign a declaration of interest in relation to each matter on the agenda. I can confirm that all declarations of interest have been received and that David Ryan, who was the originally appointed chair, has declared a non-pecuniary interest in the application at 215B Anzac Parade, Kensington. In accordance with the Code of Conduct, David will not be present at or in sight of the panel at any time during which the matter is being considered or discussed by the panel. The signed declarations of interest will be available to view through the Council's website by tomorrow morning. Do any of the panel members have anything else to declare? I don't.
No.
All right, thank you. Now, today we have two speakers registered to address the panel. And I'll just give a brief summary of the matter before us. It's subject to General Report number GR1/24. It's a draft planning proposal for the University of New South Wales land at 215B Anzac Parade, Kensington. Council is seeking advice from the Randwick Local Planning Panel on a draft planning proposal for the University of New South Wales site, as described, and adjoining land that proposes that site to amend the Randwick Local Environmental Plan 2012 by creating new provisions relating to the maximum height of building beyond the current LEP perimeter height controls. The draft planning proposal has been prepared to create certainty in future planning controls applying to the site and reflect provisions contained in the Randwick Development Control Plan 2013. The draft planning proposal incorporates a new height of building map for the site and sets a maximum building height of 24 metres, equivalent to a 6-storey educational building or a 7-storey student accommodation building, and protects the location and size of a proposed new plaza culminating the University Mall at its western end with a 1 metre height control. Now, the persons who are to speak to us today against the proposal is Michael Rowe, representing the University of New South Wales. Are you present, Mr. Rowe? I can see you on screen. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. And then speaking for the proposal, we have Lauren Sideris, representing the Kensington West Kingsford Precinct. Oh, there you are. I can see Ms. Sideris too. Thank you. It's usual to hear from those against the proposal first. So, Mr. Rowe, I'd invite you to speak first. We would normally allow 3 minutes per speaker, and then at the discretion of the chair and the panel, an extension of time. We think that because this is quite an important and extensive report, the panel will give 5 minutes to commence, and you'll hear a bell at the end of that, and then we'll grant an extension or not. And of course, we'll also ask questions if we wish. You're happy with that?
Thank you. I appreciate that additional time.
All right. Now, after we've heard from both speakers, the panel will go into closed session to deliberate on its recommendation on this matter. I might say that pro forma requires me to say that only the registered speakers will be allowed to speak and respond to questions, and any person using defamatory or offensive language may be asked to leave the meeting, or the meeting may be adjourned. I don't expect any of those events to happen. An audio recording is being made of the meeting, and we ask that speakers speak clearly into their device when addressing the panel to ensure that their comments are recorded, and the audio recording will be available through Council's website by tomorrow morning. And as I said, once we've heard from the speakers, we will adjourn into a closed session. And so over to you, Mr. Rowe, if you'd like to start.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I beg your pardon, I have missed another pro forma. We have members of council staff here, and we have 2 elected members of council here. We've got Madam Mayor, Councillor Veach, I believe is present, although I don't see her on the screen. And we have also Councillor Cathy Nielsen, who I do see on the screen. So welcome to both of you. And the staff members that I have here is Kerry Kuriaku, Director of City Planning, Meryl Bishop, Director of City Planning, Stella Agadji-Pro, Manager of Strategic Planning, Frank Coe, Manager of Development Assessment, David Appleby, Coordinator Strategic Planning, and Angela Manahan, Executive Planner. Thank you. Now, Mr. Rowe.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to yourself and members of the panel. My name is Michael Rowe. I'm a Director at Bean Planning, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. And I am addressing you on behalf of the University of New South Wales. And I want to begin by stating the university is deeply disappointed with this plan proposal that's before you, and the request that in your capacity as experts, you provide advice that directs the elected council as to the inappropriateness of such a planning proposal. As you'll be aware, the university is the single largest employer and economic generator in the Randwick LGA, employing nearly 6,500 full-time staff and contributing 2.8 billion to the Australian economy annually. Therefore, any decision to downzone university land to prevent it from providing a critical function in a manner that's contrary to the strategic planning framework should not be taken lightly by this panel. The planning proposal is politically motivated and a blatant misuse of strategic planning to create a reason for refusal of a DA that was lodged over a year ago and at advanced stages of development assessment. This is a contemptuous perversion of strategic planning and development assessment processes set out in the Act. The fact it was instigated by Council, a planning authority that's responsible for upholding the integrity of those processes, against a university, which in its own right is a public authority, is actually really difficult to comprehend how we came to be in this situation. Now, over 2 decades ago, the DCP was prepared based on a master plan developed by the university to guide development until 2020. We're now in 2024, and this master plan, and therefore the DCP, is completely out of date and does not reflect the evolution of the university or the surrounding locality. The DCP was prepared when Sydney had 1.5 million less people. The university and hospital were not identified by the state government as a higher order education and health and education precinct. There was no light rail stop in front of the site, and there were no plans for significant density uplift along the K2K corridor to support the Randwick Health and Education precinct. A lot has changed. These historic DCP controls have been abandoned across the health and education precinct with successive decisions of multiple consent authorities. It is inappropriate to now take these controls and translate them from the DCP into an LEP because it's not aligned with the current or future needs of the university, which surely must be a key strategic consideration of a planning proposal for university land. A key long-term principle for the campus has been to provide perimeter planning controls to manage the interface with the adjoining areas. Recognising the critical function and importance of the university, there has in turn been a supporting principle not to restrict development in central parts of the campus, which is reflected in the current LEP controls. The proposal before you is a dramatic shift away from this established principle and approach to the planning framework for the university. This shift is being proposed to the single largest and most important landholder in Randwick, all without any consultation in relation to the draft documentation, and despite a detailed DA being under assessment for the site to which we're discussing. The university's chief property officer met with the general manager of council as recently as last week to broadly discuss planning and collaboration. The GM neglected to mention that council would be reporting the planning proposal to the LPP at this meeting. Instead, we became aware of the meeting via the Sydney Morning Herald yesterday. This sadly sums up how council has chosen to conduct itself in a manner that's contrary to the objects of the Act, and how it has no intention of working with or understanding the strategic needs of the university in order to properly plan for it. The university is constituted under the University of New South Wales Act, which has numerous objects, including the development of university property for the benefit of the university. The university also has the status as a planning authority in its own right. Any planning proposal instigated by council in relation to university land should be prepared in collaboration with the university and careful consideration of the important contribution the university makes to the public interest in exercising its duties. And the irony of this situation where we have a collaboration area as defined by the Greater Sydney Commission, and we have a council that is deliberately not collaborating with its major stakeholder, is genuinely concerning from a planning perspective. Now, in terms of time, I have a number of deficiencies that I'd like to raise with the planning proposal report, if the panel are permitted to continue with me in terms of some of these concerns that we have in there, if that's okay, Chair.
Mr. Rowe, just a second. We've hit the 5-minute mark. The panel, are quite happy to hear Mr. Rowe continue. Yes. At this point. Yep. Shall we say another 5 minutes before questions? Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Rowe. One thing I'd like you to address, the existing control plan. Tell us why you think that should remain, because presumably if you oppose this, then you're happy with the existing control plan or you're not. I should say the university is happy with the existing one or not.
Yes. So look, there is deficiencies in the current DCP because of its age, but the DCP in of itself, as being inherent nature of a DCP, provides flexibility in order for a development assessment process to occur, which is obviously what's happening on the site in that good process of how things are constituted. So whilst the DCP more broadly is out of date, it's still a more appropriate location for these matters of consideration than to move them into an LEP, if that answers your question. I would, just going back and thank you for the additional time, I would appreciate just raising some of the concerns we have with the planning proposal itself. As you're aware, planning proposals have a structure as mandated by the department's guideline, and that involves important questions like, is the planning proposal consistent with the objectives and actions of the applicable regional, sub-regional strategies and strategic plans? The planning proposal seems to deliberately omit the 2018 Randwick Collaboration Area Place Strategy that was prepared by the Greater Sydney Commission. And one can only guess that that's the case because it would directly, this planning proposal would directly undermine and is inconsistent with the work that the GSC did, which was about supporting and incentivising this kind of development in this location to support the collaboration area that was identified in the Greater Sydney Plan. The fact it's not discussed in the planning proposal raises serious questions about the integrity of the proposal. It also selectively represents heights and densities in the K2K corridor and the contextual analysis of immediately adjacent development only. And the analysis should consider K2K as its entirety and its relationship with the health and education precinct. It also incorrectly states that the campus was not part of K2K because it only ever envisaged low to medium-rise buildings on the site. The reason why it was excluded was that it wasn't, not because it wasn't appropriate for additional height, but because it was already a higher order node of importance and didn't have a height control that applied to it. Not because there was a deliberate thought or reason why you would exclude a centre of clearly, actually, probably the key node and focal point of the Randwick LGA. The current controls have a 30-metre buffer zone through the LEP to manage the interface with the surrounding area. And the objective of this planning proposal, or stated objective, is about preserving amenity to those neighbouring properties. And so we think that the LEP already achieves this objective as it's stated in terms of the overarching objective of the planning proposal. Council's report also misrepresents the overshadowing. They present the original DA scheme shadows where there was a much taller scheme that's been modified to respond to the community feedback. Those amended plans were lodged long before this planning proposal was initiated, yet they're the ones that have been represented in the report. It all points to a particular story.
Mr. Rowe, if I can just stop you there.
Yeah.
We're through the second 5 minutes, but in getting on to things like the overshadowing, I think there may be questions about that from the panel. So would you mind if we go to questions now?
That's fine. I just qualify just one final, I guess, finishing point.
So say that again.
If I could just, I guess, in closing statements, Chair, would be just that if there are concerns with the current DA being assessed by council, they should be addressed in the DA process. And a planning proposal is not an ordinary, acceptable or appropriate means to address concerns associated with the DA. You know, it should be used as a strategic mechanism for strategic planning, not reactionary. So I implore the panel to reconsider and direct council about the appropriateness of using a planning proposal to deal with a DA. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. No questions from the panel.
Thanks, Mr. Rowe. Look, we don't have as much background as you do about the development proposal and the current proposal. But I'm just going to ask you about some of your words. So if the DCP is out of date, I accept that the scale has risen quite a lot around. Does that mean, are you saying that the DCP is out of date because things have been built in that 30-metre setback around the university, the 24-metre zone? Are you aware of, has that been breached?
Yes, it has in certain locations. If you think about the upper part of campus on around High Street.
I'm asking you.
Yeah. Sorry.
I mean, I understand that something's out of date.
Yes, it has been varied on numerous occasions. The DCP actually identifies heights throughout the campus for potential buildings, and right through the campus. Most of the recent approvals that have occurred, both on upper and lower campus, have breached the DCP.
Right. There's another thing that I want to ask you about. One thing you've referred to as downsizing the site. So university is intended for larger buildings in this site. I just haven't seen any evidence of that in your master plan. So in the university's master plan, I didn't see any evidence.
The proposal that's in with council you're aware of in terms of the DA.
Yes, but at the same time, that doesn't refer to a master plan. It's not referring to a master plan in saying that this was envisaged. In fact, that's something that's a bit difficult for us at the moment on the panel, is that we can't look at an updated university master plan that actually included a tower on the site that one would have then thought would have been part of a process of negotiating with council and negotiating with the community and so forth. We're not seeing that. So what we're being asked to do is just look as the master plan that council thinks is an interpretation.
Yeah, there's a lag here between what council is in terms of council's DCP, which obviously goes back to a master plan prepared by the university in around the year 2000, and that there is no new university statutory master plan. But what has occurred from a state planning level in the form of the actual collaboration area that was created by the Greater Sydney Commission and the broader work done by council is we've seen a complete evolution of this as a precinct, and its status has been elevated in those strategic plans of being, this is of global significance in terms of the way that it's referred to in terms of the research and productivity that occurs by the university and the hospital. And at the particularly up at the upper end of campus where you see all of the development that's going on around there has completely rewritten what was considered at the time when the 2000 master plan was prepared. Obviously, universities and Randwick itself is a completely different place in that time, and the DCP hasn't evolved with the campus and the broader area.
Do you think it's a fair enough question, though, why the university, being the proponent, hasn't led the process with an updated master plan?
Well, there actually has been discussions with council over a period of time about the potential to reconsider how this would be done. And for a whole range of different reasons, that hasn't progressed. So in reality, the university's continued over a long period of time to continue to develop in line with what the university needed, which is just a reflection of the university use. In my experience, universities are fast evolving places, and as soon as you might prepare a master plan and adopt it, it doesn't actually necessarily reflect the needs of the university. And if this was a standard residential development, you'd say, well, that's not really appropriate. We need to have a structural framework to give certainty around what's exactly going to occur on this land. But the university has been zoned in the way that it has with that flexibility on the basis in recognition of that universities aren't ordinary standard land uses, and they play a really important role for our economy and society more broadly, and we need to provide flexibility for them to do what they do as universities. And that's why they are a public authority with that level of recognition and authority in that role.
Well, I think perhaps that covers that aspect of it. Graham, would you have any questions?
Oh, I don't have a question. It was a similar question to Brandon. So
okay.
Been answered.
Well, I'm I'm interested still on what is an appropriate change, if any, or is your objection based purely on not taking the action that the council is now proposing and simply leaving it as it is?
That's right, because there is a DA in front of council, which will ultimately give certainty about what will occur on that site. And so our view is there is a framework of which that DA is already being assessed in. It's already been to the planning panel, the East Sydney Eastern panel, that is, on a number of occasions, and the university has been proactively working with that panel and its partner Igloo to come up with a scheme that the panel would be in a position to support, which has resulted in major amendments that have occurred through that DA process. And for an LEP amendment to come in when you're a year plus into a DA with a specific purpose of trying to thwart that DA, that's not a good process.
All right. Perhaps if we've got no further questions from the panel at this point, we'll go to Lauren Sideris and hear her concerns. Sideris, are you ready to proceed?
I am.
Thank
Can you hear me okay?
You might be able to speak a little closer to the microphone, I think. You've got a quiet voice.
Is that better? Is that better?
Yes, I can hear that.
Okay, sorry, I'm in a public place. Would I also be afforded 10 minutes as well to duplicate what was afforded to Michael?
Say that again.
Would I also be afforded 10 minutes?
Would you what? I'm sorry.
Also be afforded, can she have 10 minutes?
Yes. Oh, yes. You can.
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Well, I did then. That was fine.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'll start speaking. Please let me know if you can't hear me at any point. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I'm a local resident living in West Kensington, directly behind the development. I'm also the chair of the West Kensington West Kingsford precinct. I have come here to express the community's support for the draft planning proposal on this UNSW land, primarily because it causes a lot of impacts to our community. We feel that the university has a moral, ethical, and neighbourly responsibility to put a sensibly designed and respectfully designed building on this site, to which the controls do not allow to be done, and also in which has not resulted in a consultation process with us. The university, we feel, has exploited a loophole. The loophole that Michael has pointed out, and what he calls a deficiency, is that the university has decided it wants a tall building outside of its own master planning process, outside of a proper planning proposal process, which would be that the university would put forward a planning proposal with good urban design studies, good urban design analysis, and a good opportunity for people to comment on whether or not a tower form on this site is what would suit the community and the surrounding neighbours, particularly other neighbours like New College and NIDA. We believe that the university has not, in good faith, looked after the benefits and the amenity of our buildings, of our low scale, low density houses that are directly west and south of the site. His lag that he's responding to, I believe, is just them forgetting to do the process, slash not potentially wanting to because of the time delay. We also believe that they should have done it, and they should have put in their own planning proposal, but of course that council now has had to undertake this process in lieu of that, in order to look at what would be appropriate for the site, and also to provide heights that the existing university master plan shows. Public are not privy to any of the university's internal processes. We can only see what it is that is available on the master planning website and the university's master plan. So, you know, for them to change their minds and suddenly want a tower is something that surprised and shocked us all. Also, the unlimited height that is currently in the middle of the site means that if it were not them, any other developer or student accommodation developer could technically build to the Panops aeroplane height, which is taller than what they proposed. Anecdotally, we've been told that some developers did do this in their tendering process, and apparently Igloo had a better scheme, which I would doubt. The redesigned buildings are still too tall. There is still too much overshadowing impact, huge visual impact issues. Some of the houses on Doncaster Avenue have all of their morning sun taken, and then they are in a self-shadowing situation from roughly 10:30 in the morning. And this is not to mention the impacts on NIDA and New College as well, who, being in the southern orientation, do not have any of their sunlight during the middle of the day for their courtyard and therefore amenity for the students. We reject the idea that the K2K heights should apply to this site. The K2K planning controls were developed in order to provide two town centres for Kensington and for Kingsford after the Greater Sydney Commission was disbanded. This strategy is something that has been put in place by the council under consultation with the public in order to make sure that the development is appropriately done in an appropriate location. This is not the appropriate location. We support a 6 to 7 stories height, as it will allow for our properties and for our amenity where we live, where we conduct our day-to-day lives, to still be maintained. And it will also protect the amenity of future generations. We also have a problem just generally with the way in which this student accommodation is being provided on the site. We do believe that there are other uses that the university should consider, which is obviously not under consideration at the moment with these draft controls, but is a model that Igloo, the developer, put forward, which is a tall tower with very, very, very small rooms. And we believe that that is profit driven and not something that as that the university should be wanting to have at the end of their university access. The visual access is something that is very important to the university campus. I went there as a student and always found that walkway, which is headed by Scientia at the other end, to be somewhere of great significance, an iconic space. There shouldn't be an air grab, or what would otherwise be called a land grab, but in this case is an air grab, at the end of that access. There should be a respectful, sensitively designed building that respects the community, shows that the university has the intent of being respectful to the community, and also allows for the western end of the campus to be low scale to mimic the surrounding areas. I also want to be really clear. I am an architect. I'm a registered architect, and I have done a lot of urban planning in my time, and so I'm across these kinds of things. That the strategy for K2K, if you have read the documents, shows localized town centres or nodes that have retail, they have shopping, and they have accommodation in order to do what is typically known as density done well in those areas. This area was not looked at for that density, as it was seen that those urban areas needed renewal, and the community wants to see renewal in those spots. We want to have strong town centres. We have been lacking that for many, many years, and even residents who have lived in the area for upwards of 40, 50 years are saying is that's where they want to see the amenity. They don't want to see huge towers that pay for Igloo and for UNSW to, basically build a very small retail precinct down the bottom. We want a rigorous urban design study, and we wanted analysis to be done, and we're grateful for council to have done this. We're grateful for the study to be supported by 3D modelling and urban design and overshadowing analysis. And we are actually grateful that council has diligently undertaken this process, seeing as the university has not taken it upon themselves to do it themselves. It is usual, and it is something that is done by a lot of developers across Sydney, to put a planning proposal in, to have proper public exhibition, to allow for the community to comment on whether or not this loophole is actually what the community wants to see. We're against having a tower. We would like to see controls put across the entire site so that we can maintain amenity, so that we do not have impact from overshadowing, and so that we can have a respectful, sensible, and appropriately designed building on this site. I have many, many more points that touch on that in a lot of ways, but essentially what the residents want to see is low scale. We want to see a building that is the same as the character of West Kensington in this area, not the same as the K2K areas. We want to see low scale. We want to see buildings that match the existing heights. We also don't want a really important public institution such as NIDA overshadowed by a building like this. There are key urban angles and corridors of an award-winning building that need to be maintained and that will be diminished by having this huge tower or a potential tower in the future next to it. We also support that the advice that if you feel it appropriate to be given to council is to accept this planning proposal, be put on public exhibition, and then of course potentially be gazetted into law. But that is what the community wants to see. I'm here to say that for the community and to make clear that that is what we would like to see.
I think we're getting close to 10 minutes, I think.
Thank you very much for your time and for the extension to 10 minutes.
All right. Any questions from the panel?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Dearest, and for your advocacy for your for the precinct. I'm just wondering, what have you looked at? What about the adequacy? We were on site today, and we looked at that. They're very large trees along the rear boundary, and there's a 10-metre setback proposed. Probably in both proposals, like we're only commenting on the current proposal today, but wouldn't that provide a mediating buffer with the lower buildings that are actually proposed along beyond that 10-metre setback?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and thank you for that one, because that's actually the crux of this and the reason why the control needs to be applied to the entire site is because the setback does not reduce the overshadowing impact when you build up. And that is because the site is longer in the east-west direction than it is in the north-south direction. Any tower form, due to the setbacks, are required to basically be very, very tall in order to get a yield for a potential land user or landowner. And so therefore, having a setback actually exacerbates the problem. There are many examples across the university of low-scale student housing, if they were to put student housing there, in a courtyard format that achieves a very similar yield of apartments, but doesn't have to comply to such a big setback on the edges, and therefore allows for amenity within the middle of the site rather than up the site. And then also in regards to the trees, the setback is there not so much to maintain the trees or solar access to those trees, because they have been there for a very long time. It's more a planning control that tries to mitigate massing and visual impact. The way in which Kensington works is that from the site, it actually slopes down towards what is a Sydney Water Canal, a low point in Kensington, and then back up quite steeply towards a convent and then the golf course on the other side. So almost every single property in the area will be hugely impacted by very big, thick massing of tower forms that will project out of nowhere and set a very dangerous precedent for inappropriate design. So an analogy is, very similar to somewhere where you might see in Darling Point, where you have tall towers sticking out of nowhere that occurred when there was a lack of regard to planning controls in earlier years. This is what we're concerned about. We're concerned about setting a really dangerous precedent for other buildings in the area to do a similar thing. And before you know it, you have many, many towers outside of K2K that are complying to setbacks, which is, the control, but are exploiting this issue in the middle of the site where they can just go up. And because somebody else, which is a university, who have a moral responsibility to not do something like this to their neighbours, has set that precedent and allowed other people to say, hey, they've done it over there. I hope that answers your question. If not,
And I just have one other question, Mr. Chairman.
Mm-hmm.
Look, the student accommodation, you don't like the model that Igloo is putting forward. I've seen quite a few of them. Have you?
Yes, I have. I have seen quite a few.
What's wrong with the model?
So the model itself, it provides rooms that typically, if you were to look at the RFDC, the residential flat design code, would be smaller than the minimum student studio apartment size. They're essentially a room, 15 meters squared, some of them sometimes 17 meters squared, that also contains a kitchen, the bathroom, a table, and a bed. And what this has been equated to anecdotally by people who lived in them is a sardine can. So what they do is sardine tin, I should say, they very, very small area in order to yield a great and large amount of apartment numbers. And then the problem with that is you would say, okay, well, small room, should we charge them an affordable rate because it's a very small space? Actually, the opposite happens. They charge a very high rate, anecdotally, again, somewhere around $600, $700, $800, depending on the size of the room, which is unaffordable to a lot of students. Some of the more wealthy international students are able to afford it, but a lot of the ones who don't come from wealthy families cannot, and also the domestic students cannot afford it. The other issue with the model is that, which is not something that we think is appropriate, is that they're usually full during semester time, but then for the rest of the year, they're typically empty because the students can't afford them outside of this time, but also because no one would want to live in such a small space, throughout the year. It doesn't provide amenity. And so we're, as a community, more a fan of what you see facing the racecourse on the university side there. Some really lovely student accommodations have been built there. Low-rise courtyard type typology buildings that have good amenity. They have ground plane amenity. They allowed for almost apartment style living. They still have small rooms, but they have breakout areas within apartments. This is what our community has discussed in our meetings as we feel is appropriate. And this is also what the university master plan shows. It shows a courtyard building. It doesn't show the use of student accommodation, which is fine. It's their land. They can put whatever use on that they want, but it does show a courtyard building.
Yeah, Ms. Sideris, I appreciate your concern about that, but at the scale we're dealing with, the appropriateness of the accommodation is probably something that's going to be more dealt with at the development application stage, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's just background information, I suppose, in the same way in which Michael gave you background information.
All right.
The model itself, all of those things provide a tower. The tower is the issue because the tower is tall. The taller the tower, the more overshadowing, the more visual impact, the more massing.
All right.
So
in summary, to me, can I say the two things I'm getting out of this mission largely is you don't want to see high-rise buildings creeping west of Anzac Parade because that goes into the residential area, which is predominantly low scale.
Correct.
And then the fact that the high-rise component will have both overshadowing effects and intensification effects that will again affect the local community. And
correct.
And in your estimation, not reflect the pattern of, say, student housing anyway, that we've seen around the rest of Kensington.
Yes, and we believe that pattern, if able to be implemented, will set a bad precedent for future generations. And we believe that where the intensification has occurred, as I said, density done well, is in the K2K town centres, and that's where the community wants to see the intensification. I want to be clear, we're not against development. The site is ripe for some sort of building on it, and the community accepts that. We just want to see the intensification where it's been planned. There are empty sites there at the moment that are awaiting buildings, and we want to see that outcome. We want to see that intensification happen.
Yeah. And did I understand another part of your submission is that if the council puts the current proposal, as in the changes to the height limit, to Gateway, it'll go on public exhibition, and then the community would have an appropriate opportunity to, again, debate the all the arguments that you've been putting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's what we feel is right and fair and just. The community wants to have their say. We're a passionate community. We want to see we want to have the opportunity to support. There are some people who may, have alternate opinions and may also want to put in submissions, but given people that opportunity is what is key. Michael spoke about process, and we want to see a process and an expeditious process.
Okay, I think we understand that. Now, Graham, did you want to ask any questions?
No, I just meant both speakers. I thought they've presented clear, concise information of their different viewpoints, and it's been tremendously helpful for me.
Okay.
Deliberations.
Now, I see Mr. Rose put his hand up. Do you want to hear any further response from Mr. Rowe? Panel? I see Mr. Rose asking to.
Yeah, I don't mind, but it's not typical. It's not typical.
No. Well, I'll allow you one response, Mr. Rowe.
Thank you for allowing me to do that. I think that I just wanted to reiterate there actually has been a lot of consultation that's gone on around the DA process. It's been multiple community consultation sessions. It's been on exhibition twice. So there has been a lot of opportunity for the community to voice its opinion. It may not like what's proposed, but we've got to consider the proposal within the context of providing housing and what it does for the ecosystem of the university. As you'll be aware, the federal government has announced that the future expansion of international enrolments is linked with its ability to provide housing on campus. So by restricting the capacity of sites and what they can deliver in terms of housing in a housing crisis is a pretty serious thing for council to be initiating, and it needs to be considered as part of any future decision.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Rowe. Ms. Sidris, I see you've got two hands up now. I think there's got to be a limit.
Sorry, I didn't realise. Can I
of course,
also?
if I allow you to respond, I don't know if I'm going to have to allow Mr. Rowe to respond again. So at some point,
that'll be it.
we're going to have to stop.
Yeah.
Were you simply going to reiterate what you've already told us?
No, I'd like to add one additional point, if I may. I've been involved in this quite early on, and we've been requesting further consultation with the university and with IGLU in order to have workshopping sessions. And we haven't had any to date, other than last night with IGLU. That was the first we've had after the resubmitted plans. So the key is that we haven't been able to consult with the university, and they're saying that they have, but there hasn't been any effort between the submission and now, except for last night, to do that. So I just like to make that clear as well. Yeah.
All right.
For listening to that.
Thank you. I think you've made your point. Panel has no more questions.
No.
Well, thank you, Mr. Rowe, Ms. Sidris, for your very able presentations. So we'll terminate that discussion and we'll resolve back into our panel meeting. And if we are to have no more public discussion on this, we can resolve into our closed session. Are the panel members happy to do that?
Yep.
All right, thank you. I close the public meeting and thank you for your attendance once again, one and all, including those people who are online. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.